this again. Hi, Zaphras here. Just going through sort of an explanation on my Sever build. It's pretty similar to Gazi's Sever build, however, I changed to a passive defense and got rid of Blight. I'll go into this. It runs very smoothly. Starting with our skill tree, take 1 point into Reap, Enhanced Reap, and Acolyte's Reap. This is for corpse generation. We move on to this node, our core skills. We're not taking Blight. The major reason for not taking Blight is it's directional. I've had a couple of instances where the enemy was right next to me and the Blight bolt had passed right through them. Missing those sucks because we are a essence hungry build, and any essence that we're not spending on Sever is really quite annoying. We're going to take 5 points into Sever, Enhanced Sever, and Paranormal Sever. This gives us a source of Vulnerable. It's pretty good. The uptime isn't 100%. Hued Flesh for corpse generation, 3 out of 3. On to the next one, Corpse and Macabre, or Macabre. Blood Mist, good defensive node. However, we're using it for something else. So our Blood Mist is going to be generating corpses. One other good option is to fortify, since we are using fortify in this build. If you don't feel like you have an issue with corpse generation, you can always switch over to fortify, gain more fortify. It's always a benefit. More defense is good. This part doesn't really matter for us, but we have to get to one of these nodes. Our other source of damage is Corpse Explosion. We are taking the Blighted Corpse Explosion, which deals shadow damage over time. Quite a big damage boost, so extra levels on gear for both of these are really great. We're taking Grim Harvest for essence generation, Field by Death for extra damage. And this is kind of where I will vary from most of the Sever builds that I've seen. So for example, Gazi's build, it's a really great build. Uses a very good defensive layer as long as you make it to your damage and rotation. Decrepify and Enhanced Decrepify would be the only two nodes that you would take here, and then you would level this if you can as an extra benefit. This is very good defense. However, it's active defense, and I was opting for more of a passive defense. This is also active damage. I was trying to make it to where this is the only essence dump, though. We're going to take this node only. Death's Embrace, and then we're moving on. We're taking 1 point into Reaper's Pursuit, 3 points into Gloom, 3 points into Terror, and 3 points into Crippling Darkness. If you were to get extra points in anything, Crippling Darkness is actually really, really good to get extra points in, because it's very easy to scale damage to stun enemies. Corpse Tendrils will stun, so that is great. Another thing, we're going to take 1 point into this, and then we're going to take 1 point into this, and 1 point into this. So we have 2 sources of vulnerable. Our uptime is actually really good. And Corpse Tendrils does a lot of CC. And it's not really anything as far as like downtime. Pretty much every pull you'll be able to use a Corpse Tendril. We are taking Necrotic Carapace because we're going to be consuming corpses all the time. all the time. This part right here is optional. So what you could replace this with is one of the curses or blight until you get this aspect. So the reason why I'm using Bloodwave right now is because it deals a massive amount of shadow damage over time. So once you get that, I would highly suggest switching over to the Bloodwave. The Bone Storm has a longer CD, and it doesn't deal nearly as much damage. It does have a very good defensive benefit, and it does increase your critical strike chance, which we are a critical strike build. However, I found this to just flat out deal more damage. We are sacrificing our minions, so we will be taking Standalone and Momentum Mori. And then, of course, we'll take Shadow Blight. So going through the imprints that I have, or the aspects that I have, I'll take the Stacking Armor aspect. Barrier. This part is optional. We don't need this. We could always switch it out for something else. This one is mandatory. You deal 50% increased damage for 6 seconds after the Shadow Blight. Keep passive damages enemies 10 times. This is very important for our build, along with the 2 other essences that I have. One other thing is I'm finding that I'm tanky enough to not need a shield. So I get the benefit of having these 2 as aspects as well. I do take the barrier because it's just another defensive layer. This one is another mandatory aspect. Blood mist triggers corpse explosions on surrounding corpses. So whenever we're in a hotspot, we'll not only gain immune from blood mist, but blood mist is going to give us essence by exploding the corpses. And if you take the corpse node, then you'll always have corpses no matter what is going on in your fight. So I do think that this is absolutely mandatory for this build. Alright, and our next mandatory aspect is critical strikes from Sever have 10% chance to spawn a pool of blight. That deals 20% extra damage. This is just extra damage since we're not taking the nodes, but our blight will still damage them. So that is always a benefit, and I believe even without, let's see, oh, it doesn't slow without, okay, so never mind, but it is extra damage, so it is kind of the best in slot. On this one, we're going to be scaling crit on this build for our Sever. So gain 10% increased critical strike chance for 6 seconds after you cast Corpse Tendrils. You deal 30% bonus critical strike damage to enemies damaged by Corpse Tendrils. So when you get in, Corpse Tendrils does not consume a corpse. So we're going to use this, Corpse Explode, and start the Sever Storm. And one of the negatives with the other Sever builds that I was noticing is it's hard to group enemies, and sometimes you're stuck like trying to generate a corpse on one single enemy because they were skating around the outside of the fight. And this solves most of that issue. It's not 100%, but it does solve most of the issue. I took your sacrifices are increased by 15% on this one. You can choose whatever you want on the rings for the most part, except for, I'm sorry, on the secondary ring. But this ring is a mandatory slot if you're going to drop blight. So we're going to use Blood Wave, and our Blood Wave desecrates the ground as it travels, dealing a large amount of damage over 4 seconds. Like I said, I've tested a couple of different things. I have tested the Bone Storm. It just doesn't really seem to make much of a difference, aside from the critical strike chance. And it does provide a defensive benefit. But I like the Blood Wave a lot more. On our amulet, we are using basic skills. Grant 20% damage reduction for 3 seconds. We will be periodically using Reap throughout the fight. So if you have downtime or you haven't used it within like 5 seconds, I would just throw one out there, get a corpse. It's always a benefit. So that's my aspects. And then we're going to move on to the Book of the Dead. We are sacrificing everything. I'm going to sacrifice Reaper for shadow damage. We're going to sacrifice our Cold Skellies for increased damage to vulnerable enemies. The other ones are pretty good. Maximum Essence would be great if we were even generating Maximum Essence, but we're not. We're always using it. And then I do take critical strike damage from the Iron Golem. A lot of people will take the Bone Golem for increased attack speed. I don't find it makes that much of a difference. Like I said, we are scaling critical strike. So on our rings is one of the best sources for our critical strike chance. So you'll get critical strike chance from those. And then another thing that we would scale is vulnerable damage, damage to slowed enemies, damage to stun enemies. We also want to gain fortify generation and reduction while fortified. Rank to corpse tendrils is great. Rank to corpse explosion is great. And yeah, that's kind of just an overview of the build that I've been using, and it's very smooth. It was a lot less like manual working of the corpses and stuff over the other builds. So see this group here, this is a nightmare dungeon. So we slash corpse tendrils, explode, and sever. And it's pretty easy to do this rotation as long as the thing can generate corpses. And say we're getting into trouble, we just switch over and blow up all these corpses. And we'll get our essence back and be able to start a rotation. So this is the Blood Wave. It does deal quite a bit of damage. So corpse tendrils, explode. I got stunned. But there we go. So it's a nice build. If you want, try it out. I've been having a lot of fun with this one. And I don't think I'm going to switch it off. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think.